The cold steel of a revolver pressed against Lucinda Lawson's temple as she fought to steady her breathing in the dusty bank of Silver Creek, Colorado. The year was 1873, and this was the third time she'd stared death in the face since her father's passing. But this time was different. This time, a pair of striking blue eyes watched her from across the room, calculating and calm amid the chaos. "Nobody moves or the lady dies," shouted the bank robber, his breath reeking of whiskey and desperation. Lucinda didn't scream. She'd long since learned screaming did little good in a world that rarely listened to women's voices. Instead, she watched the stranger with the blue eyes, a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and a weathered Stetson. His hand hovered near his holster with practiced ease. "You don't want to do that, friend," the stranger drawled, his voice low and steady as a mountain stream. "That's an innocent woman you're threatening." The robber's grip tightened. "Back off, Cowboy," the stranger, whom Lucinda would later know as Thomas Dawson, didn't flinch. "I reckon you've got about 2 seconds to let the lady go before I put a hole in you that the undertaker won't be able to patch." What happened next unfolded in a blur. A distraction from outside the whinny of a horse pulled the robber's attention for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Thomas drew and fired with lightning precision. The bullet grazed the robber's shoulder, causing him to release Lucinda and drop his weapon with a howl of pain. Thomas was across the room in 3 strides, disarming the wounded man with one hand while pulling Lucinda safely away with the other. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries while the bank manager and several patrons subdued the now whimpering robber. "Yes," Lucinda managed, though her legs trembled beneath her skirts. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson, Thomas Dawson." He tipped his hat slightly. "And you'd be Miss Lawson, if I'm not mistaken. Your father's general store has the finest selection of tobacco west of the Mississippi." Lucinda's breath caught. "Had my father passed 3 months ago," something in Thomas's eyes softened. "My condolences, Miss Lawson, I hadn't heard." The sheriff burst through the doors then, bringing with him the smell of dust and authority. "Everyone all right in here? Dawson, might have known you'd be in the thick of things." Thomas nodded at the lawman. "Sheriff Wilson. Just happened to be making a deposit when our friend here decided to make a withdrawal without an account." As the sheriff took the robber into custody, Lucinda found herself studying Thomas Dawson more carefully. He wasn't like the typical drifters who pass through Silver Creek. His clothes, though trail-worn, were of good quality. The revolver he'd holstered was custom-made, its pearl grip gleaming in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the bank's windows. "You saved my life, Mr. Dawson," Lucinda said when the commotion had died down. "I don't know how to repay such a debt." Thomas smiled, and the small crinkles around his eyes suggested he smiled often. "No debt to repay, Miss Lawson. Any decent man would have done the same. Few would have done it with such skill," she countered. "You're not just passing through, are you?" "No, madam. I've purchased the old Carlton ranch outside of town, planning to raise horses." He paused, then added, "If you're heading back to your store, I'd be honored to escort you. These streets might not be safe with that fellow's friends potentially about." Lucinda hesitated. Since her father's death, she'd learned to be wary of men offering help that often came with expectations she wasn't willing to meet. But something about Thomas Dawson's straightforward manner eased her concerns. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I would appreciate that." As they walked the short distance to Lawson's general store, Lucinda became acutely aware of the town's eyes upon them. Silver Creek was small enough that gossip traveled faster than telegraph messages. "So, you're running your father's store now?" Thomas asked, seemingly oblivious to the curious glances. "Trying to," Lucinda admitted. "It's not easy. The suppliers don't take a woman seriously, and some of the townsfolk think I should sell and marry one of the local boys." Thomas frowned. "Your father built that store from nothing." "I remember him telling me how he hauled the lumber himself when he first settled here." Lucinda looked at him in surprise. "You knew my father well. We crossed paths a few times. He was a fair man, sold me my first proper saddle when I was just a ranch hand with more dreams than dollars." Thomas's expression grew somber. "Men like your father are rare in these parts." They reached the general store, its painted sign Lawson's faded but still proudly displayed above the entrance. Lucinda unlocked the door and hesitated before entering. Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Dawson? It seems the least I could offer after what you did today." Thomas removed his hat. "I'd be much obliged, Miss Lawson." Inside, the store smelled of leather, tobacco, and the faint sweetness of candies in glass jars. Lucinda moved behind the counter where a small stove sat, putting on a pot of coffee with practiced movements. "It must be difficult," Thomas observed, looking around at the well-stocked shelves, "managing all this on your own." Lucinda's hands stilled momentarily. "It is. But it's mine now, the only thing I have left of him. I won't give it up easily." "Nor should you," Thomas agreed. "Though if you don't mind my saying, a good business partner might ease the burden." Lucinda handed him a steaming cup of coffee. "Are you offering, Mr. Dawson?" His laugh was warm and genuine. "No, madam. My talents lie with horses, not ledger books, but I know a thing or two about fighting against expectations." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of customers Mrs. Peterson and her daughter Emma, come for flour and gossip in equal measure. Their eyes widened at the sight of Thomas Dawson in the store. "Miss Lawson," Mrs. Peterson said with a nod that didn't quite hide her curiosity. "We heard about the excitement at the bank. Are you unharmed?" "Thanks to Mr. Dawson," Lucinda replied, moving to help them with their purchases. Emma, a pretty girl of 19, batted her eyelashes at Thomas. "How brave you must have been, Mr. Dawson." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Just happened to be in the right place, Miss Peterson." After the Petersons left, loaded down with supplies and fresh information to spread, Thomas finished his coffee and placed the cup carefully on the counter. "I should be going. Got a delivery of stock coming in this afternoon." He paused, then added, "Miss Lawson, there's a social at the church this Sunday. Perhaps you might consider attending. The community could use a reminder that Lawson's is still very much in business." Lucinda hadn't attended any social functions since her father's funeral. The thought of facing the town's pitying glances and not-so-subtle matchmaking attempts made her stomach knot. "I'm not sure, Mr. Dawson. The store can survive one afternoon closed," he finished gently. "Consider it a business decision if nothing else." After he left, Lucinda found herself unable to focus on her inventory tasks. Thomas Dawson was unlike any man she'd met in Silver Creek. He'd saved her life, yes, but it was more than that. He'd spoken to her as an equal, respected her decision to keep the store, and hadn't once suggested she needed a husband to make her way in the world. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze that made the September heat bearable. Lucinda stood before her mirror, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd chosen, one of the few non-black garments she owned that still fit properly. She'd lost weight since her father's passing, the stress and long hours taking their toll. The church social was already in full swing when she arrived, blankets spread on the grass outside the white steepled building, baskets of food laid out on tables, and children running and laughing in the sunshine. Lucinda hesitated at the edge of the gathering, suddenly uncertain. "You came." She turned to find Thomas Dawson beside her, looking different in his Sunday best, a clean black coat over a crisp white shirt, his usually unruly brown hair tamed with pomade. "I decided it was good business sense," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Thomas offered his arm. "Well then, businesswoman, let me introduce you to some potential customers." The afternoon passed more pleasantly than Lucinda had anticipated. Thomas stayed by her side, introducing her to newcomers to the area who might not know about Lawson's general store, and skillfully navigating her away from the more gossipy townspeople. "Thank you," she murmured as they sat with plates of fried chicken and potato salad. "You've made this much easier than it would have been alone." Thomas tipped his head toward a group of men near the church steps. See that fellow in the gray suit? That's Henry Wilcox, representative for the Western Pacific Railroad. They're looking to establish a proper station here. If that happens, Silver Creek will grow and so will your business. Lucinda studied the man with new interest. How do you know all this? I make it my business to know what might affect my horse trade, Thomas said simply. You should introduce yourself. The railroad will need supplies and a contract with them could set you up for years. I doubt Mr. Wilcox would take a female merchant seriously, Lucinda sighed. He might surprise you, and if he doesn't, well, that's his loss. But you won't know unless you try. Thomas stood and offered his hand. Come on, I'll introduce you. To Lucinda's surprise, Mr. Wilcox was indeed interested in discussing potential supply arrangements with Lawsons. By the time their conversation concluded, Lucinda had secured a tentative agreement to provide basic provisions when the railroad survey team arrived the following month. As the social wound down with the setting sun, Thomas walked Lucinda back toward town, the last golden rays of daylight painting the dirt road and wooden buildings in warm hues. I can't thank you enough, Lucinda said. That contract could make all the difference for the store. You did that yourself, Thomas corrected. All I did was make an introduction. They stopped outside the store, which also housed Lucinda's small apartment on the second floor. The street was quiet, most townsfolk still at the social or already settled in for the evening. Would you like to come in for coffee? Lucinda asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush. I mean, it's not. Thomas smiled. I know exactly what you mean, Miss Lawson, and while I'd enjoy nothing more than your company and coffee, I should get back to the ranch. My foreman's wife is expecting their first child any day now, and I promise to keep an eye on things while he's distracted. Lucinda felt both relief and a strange disappointment. Of course, another time, perhaps. I'd like that very much. He hesitated, then added, Miss Lawson, I'm planning to bring some horses to town next Saturday for the monthly market. Perhaps you'd allow me to take you to dinner at the hotel afterward, to celebrate your railroad contract. The invitation caught her off guard. Mr. Dawson, are you courting me? His laugh was warm in the gathering twilight. I suppose I am, though I'm making a poor job of it if you have to ask. Is that something you might consider, Miss Lawson? Lucinda thought of the month since her father's death, the loneliness, the struggle, the men who'd offered marriage as though doing her a favor. Thomas Dawson was different. He saw her strength, not just her vulnerability. Yes, she said softly. I think I would like that very much. The week passed in a blur of activity. News of the potential railroad contract brought more customers to Lawson's, curious to see the woman merchant who'd secured such an opportunity. Lucinda found herself busier than she'd been since taking over the store, ordering new stock and reorganizing the shelves to accommodate the increased business. By Saturday, she was both exhausted and exhilarated. The monthly market brought the surrounding ranches and farms to Silver Creek, filling the town square with stalls selling everything from fresh produce to handcrafted goods. Lucinda had hired young Billy Jenkins to watch the store for a few hours so she could see Thomas's horses. She found him in the livestock section, standing beside 3 magnificent animals that drew admiring glances from the crowd. Thomas himself cut an impressive figure, back in his working clothes, denim pants, chambray shirt, leather vest, and the ever-present Stetson shading his eyes from the midday sun. Miss Lawson, he called when he spotted her, his face lighting up. Come meet my pride and joy. The horses were beautiful, a glossy black stallion, a chestnut mare, and a dappled gray gelding that nudged Lucinda's hand when she approached. This is Sterling, Thomas said, patting the gray's neck. Best cow horse I've ever trained. The stallion is Midnight and the mare is Copper. I'm hoping to sell Sterling and Copper today, though parting with them won't be easy. They're magnificent, Lucinda said sincerely. Where did you learn to raise such fine animals? Thomas's expression grew distant. My father was a horse trainer in Kentucky before the war. He taught me everything I know. He shook off the moment of melancholy. "How's the store today? Busy enough that I had to hire help," Lucinda said with a smile. "It seems your advice about the railroad contract has already paid dividends in goodwill." They were interrupted by a potential buyer for Sterling, and Lucinda stepped back to watch Thomas at work. He was knowledgeable and honest, pointing out both the horse's strengths and the small scar on its left flank from a barbed wire fence. The buyer, impressed by Thomas's integrity, agreed to the asking price on the spot. By late afternoon, Thomas had sold both sterling and copper for fair prices, keeping only midnight. "He's not for sale at any price," he explained as they walked midnight back toward the livery stable where Thomas had arranged to board him overnight. "He was my first real success as a breeder." With midnight settled comfortably, Thomas offered Lucinda his arm. "Shall we head to the hotel for that dinner I promised? I believe we have a railroad contract to celebrate." The Grand Hotel was Silver Creek's only proper dining establishment, occupying the first floor of the town's largest building. Its dining room, with its white tablecloths and glass oil lamps, represented the height of local sophistication. Several heads turned as Thomas escorted Lucinda to a corner table, the women's eyes curious, the men's respectful or envious, depending on their relationship with either of them. Over a dinner of roast beef and potatoes, Thomas asked about Lucinda's life before her father's death. She found herself telling him things she rarely shared about her mother's death from influenza when Lucinda was just 12, about learning the store business at her father's side, about her brief time at a ladies' academy in Denver before being called home when her father's health began to fail. "What about you?" she asked as they lingered over apple pie. "You mentioned your father was from Kentucky." Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting the flickering lamplight. "He came west after the war. He fought for the Union looking for a fresh start. Met my mother in Kansas. She was a schoolteacher. They had a small horse farm, nothing fancy, but my father had a way with the animals." "And your parents, are they?" "Gone," Thomas confirmed quietly. "Fever took them both in '67. I was 20. Worked ranch jobs, saved my money, learned everything I could about breeding and training. The Carlton place is the first land I've owned outright," he smiled faintly. "My father would have been proud to see it, I think." After dinner, Thomas walked Lucinda back to the store. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamond dust, the nearly full moon casting enough light to see by without a lantern. "I had a wonderful time," Lucinda said as they reached her door. "Thank you." Thomas took her hand gently. "Miss Lawson, Lucinda, I've enjoyed your company more than I can say. I'd like to call on you properly if you'd permit it." The moonlight softened his features, making him look younger, less weathered by sun and hard work. Lucinda felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nervousness. "I would like that very much, Thomas." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent a shiver down her spine. "Good night, Lucinda. Sweet dreams." As autumn progressed toward winter, Thomas became a regular visitor at Lawson's general store. Sometimes he would bring small gifts, a jar of honey from his ranch, wildflowers gathered along the trail, once even a book of poetry he'd found in Denver on a business trip. But more valuable than any gift was his presence, his conversation, the way he looked at Lucinda as though seeing not just who she was, but who she could become. The railroad survey team arrived as promised, bringing with them the contract that secured Lawson's position as their primary supplier in Silver Creek. Business flourished, and Lucinda hired Billy Jenkins full-time, teaching him the store operations much as her father had once taught her. By early December, Silver Creek was buzzing with another piece of news: the annual Christmas dance, to be held at the newly completed Railroad Hotel. It would be the social event of the season, with people coming from as far as 50 miles to attend. "You'll go with me, of course," Thomas said one evening as he helped Lucinda close the store, lifting heavy sacks of flour onto high shelves with ease. Lucinda hesitated. "I don't have anything suitable to wear to such a grand affair." Thomas set down the last sack and dusted his hands on his pants. Then perhaps you should open that package I brought earlier. Lucinda had noticed the brown paper parcel he'd set on the counter when he arrived, but had assumed it was something he needed for the ranch. Now, with her heart beating faster, she untied the string and folded back the paper. Inside was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen, deep burgundy silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, made in the latest fashion she'd admired in a catalog months ago but could never have afforded. "Thomas," she breathed, touching the silk reverently, "I can't accept this, it's too much." "Consider it a business investment," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "The owner of the most successful store in town should look the part, don't you think?" Tears pricked at Lucinda's eyes. "You're impossible." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Impossible to resist, I hope." "That too," she admitted with a watery laugh. The night of the dance arrived with a light dusting of snow that transformed Silver Creek into a scene from a Christmas card. The new railroad hotel was festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and a towering pine tree stood in one corner of the ballroom, decorated with candles and handmade ornaments. When Thomas came to escort Lucinda, his appreciative gaze as she descended the stairs from her apartment made the hours she'd spent preparing worthwhile. The burgundy dress fit perfectly, setting off her dark hair, which she'd arranged in an elegant updo with a few curls framing her face. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Thomas said, his voice husky with emotion. Lucinda took in his appearance, the formal black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, the crisp white shirt, his usually unruly hair tamed into submission. "You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Dawson." The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived, the town's brass band playing a lively tune while couples whirled across the polished wooden floor. Heads turned as Thomas led Lucinda in, but for once she didn't mind the attention. Tonight, with Thomas beside her, she felt beautiful and confident. They danced for hours, stopping only for refreshments and brief conversations with friends and business acquaintances. Thomas proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her through waltzes and polkas with the same quiet competence he showed in all things. During a break in the music, he led her onto the hotel's veranda, where the cold December air provided relief from the ballroom's heat. Stars glittered above them in the clear night sky, and their breath formed small clouds in the frosty air. "Are you cold?" Thomas asked, slipping his jacket around her shoulders. "Not anymore," Lucinda replied, breathing in his scent leather and pine in something uniquely him. Thomas leaned against the veranda railing, looking out at the snow-covered town. "When I first came to Silver Creek, I thought only of building my horse business. I never expected." He trailed off, turning to look at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I never expected you, Lucinda Lawson." He took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her wrist. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and determination, your kindness. I find myself thinking of the future in ways I never did before." Lucinda's heart hammered in her chest. "What ways?" "Ways that include you," Thomas said softly. "Always you." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Lucinda's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring with a single perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," Thomas explained. "The one thing of value I kept when I sold everything else to start over." He took a deep breath, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "Lucinda Lawson, I love you more than I ever thought possible. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The world seemed to pause around them, the music from inside fading to a distant hum, the cold air still against her skin, even the stars holding their breath for her answer. "Thomas," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. She stopped, the words sticking in her throat. It wasn't that she didn't love him, she did, desperately. But marriage meant trust, complete and absolute, and after losing her parents, after struggling alone for so long. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared to trust like that again." Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes, not disappointment or hurt, but a deep comprehension of her fears. He closed the ring box gently and took both her hands in his. "I'm scared too," he confessed. "Loving someone means risking loss. I know that better than most." He brought her hands to his chest where she could feel the steady beating of his heart. "Lucinda, I'm not asking you to leap blindly. I'm asking you to walk beside me, one step at a time." She searched his face, finding nothing but honesty and love in his expression. "What if I'm not ready?" Thomas smiled softly. "Then trust me slow, but don't stop trying. We have all the time in the world." The simple understanding in those words broke something loose inside her, a fear she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her. Tears spilled freely now, but they were healing tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Dawson." His face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He opened the ring box again with slightly trembling hands and slipped the diamond onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her all along. "I love you," he said, drawing her close, "and I promise you won't regret trusting me." "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easily now, naturally. "And I promise to keep trying even when it's hard." His lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home, tender at first, then deepening with a passion that made her cling to him, the cold night forgotten in the warmth they created together. When they finally returned to the ballroom, cheeks flushed and eyes bright, Lucinda didn't mind the knowing smiles or the whispers that followed them. Let them talk. She had found something precious, not just love, but the courage to embrace it. The news of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. Most reactions were positive. Thomas was well respected, and Lucinda had proven herself a capable businesswoman. A few disappointed suitors and matchmaking mothers sniffed their disapproval, but such gossip was short-lived in a town with more pressing concerns. They married in April 1874, when the wildflowers carpeted the hills around Silver Creek, and the promise of new life filled the air. The ceremony was held in the same church where they'd attended the social where Thomas had first courted her. But the celebration afterward was at the Dawson Ranch, now flourishing with a growing herd of quality horses. Lucinda wore her mother's lace veil with a new gown of ivory silk, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers Thomas had gathered for her that morning. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the church packed to the rafters with well-wishers. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Mrs. Dawson," he whispered against her lips, "my wife." They built a life together that merged both their dreams. Lucinda continued to run Lawson's General Store, now expanded to serve the growing town that the railroad had transformed. Thomas's horse breeding business thrived, his animals sought after throughout the territory for their quality and training. A year after their wedding, Lucinda gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Alina after Thomas's mother. 2 years later came James, named for Lucinda's father. Their home rang with laughter and love, the fears of the past fading with each passing season. On their 5th anniversary, Thomas surprised Lucinda by taking her on a picnic to the spot where he'd proposed. Spring sunshine warmed the air as they spread a blanket beneath a flowering cottonwood tree, their children playing nearby under the watchful eye of Thomas's foreman's wife. "Happy anniversary, my love," Thomas said, pressing a kiss to Lucinda's temple as they sat side by side, watching Alina show her little brother how to make daisy chains. Lucinda leaned into his embrace, marveling at how far they'd come. 5 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes like we've always been together. Thomas took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that had joined her mother's diamond. "Any regrets?" Lucinda thought of the scared young woman she'd been, afraid to trust her heart to another's keeping. How different her life would be now if she hadn't found the courage to try. "Not one," she said, turning to meet his gaze. The love she saw there was as strong and steady as it had been on their wedding day, deeper, perhaps, tempered by the everyday trials and joys they'd shared. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for trusting me," he replied, "even when it was hard. Mama, Papa, look what I made." Elinor called, running toward them with a crown of daisies clutched carefully in her small hands. As Thomas settled the flower crown on Lucinda's head with exaggerated ceremony, declaring her the queen of their hearts, Lucinda silently thanked the frightened young woman she'd once been for taking that first tentative step toward trust. It had been the beginning of everything. Later, as they rode home in the wagon with their sleepy children nestled between them, Lucinda looked at the life they'd built together, the thriving businesses, the beautiful children, the love that had only grown stronger through each challenge they'd faced. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noticing her contemplative expression in the golden light of sunset. Lucinda smiled, her heart full. "Just that some journeys are worth every difficult step." He reached across their sleeping children to take her hand, his blue eyes as warm and steady as the day he'd first told her to trust him slow, but never stop trying. "And our journey's just beginning," he said softly, the promise in his voice as true as the day he'd first made it. Lucinda squeezed his hand, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever paths lay ahead, they would walk them together one trusting step at a time.